Al, did you know that they sometimes take video games
Mm-hmm.
and turn them into motion pictures?
That is true.
It's a shocking revelation.
They're usually not very good.
That is also true. Most of the time, they're not good. And around the time that this movie that we are talking about today came out,
Mm-hmm.
that was very much the case.
Oh, yes.
Because I don't think at this point there had really been a big Hollywood video game adaptation movie that had come out and was good. Even like goodish.
Good-ish.
Yeah. So of course today we're going to talk about one of those. One of the biggest.
One of the infamous ones.
One of the infamous ones. Hello, welcome to this week's episode of the Season Lamb Checkup OVA. It's a podcast where we have conversations about video games, anime, and manga. I'm Jared, joined as always by Doc Al and Ladium.
Hello.
This is episode 149.
Good Lord.
It's a lot of episodes.
It is a lot of episodes.
And we're talking about a video game movie that came out in the year 2001.
Video game-ish. It's like inspired by video game.
I mean, that there is a video game in the title.
There is a video game in the title. It's just a very odd film.
Yes. That's a good way to put it. It definitely feels like one of those films that you would like at the very beginning, it's like based on a true story or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's like one like sentence in it that is actually part of the true story and everything else is made up.
Or like one character has the first name of somebody that actually was in the story and that's it.
Yeah. Or like inspired by the events of. But yeah, we are talking about, like we said, one of the most infamous, one of the most famous video game movies, and also just movies that push forth the envelope of technology.
Mm-hmm.
It's a movie called Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within.
It is called that.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. Oh boy.
What a film.
Yeah. A film that nearly bankrupted Square.
Yep. I mean, like, honestly, looking at it, I understand why, because this had to have been so expensive.
Mm-hmm. The Wikipedia says that the budget exceeded its original budget towards the end of production and reached a final cost of $137 million.
Oh my God.
Which for your first outing, not a good idea unless you're being bankrolled by like a billionaire.
Right.
They only were able to recoup $85 million at the box office, so that is a loss of like $52 million. So that is why people call this a bomb.
A stinker. I was one of those people who saw it in theaters when it first came out.
There you go. You tried your best to save them. I did not see it in theaters, but I ended up renting it when it came out on DVD eventually. I don't know if this was in 01 or 02, but I did eventually see it. And this was me watching this film with like very little context of Final Fantasy in general. Like I'd played a little bit of 7
Mm-hmm.
and a tiny bit of 8 because from the Pizza Hut demo.
Right.
But other than that, I had no idea about Final Fantasy really.
Which
Like that's some games I don't play.
I played a lot of Final Fantasy, like a
Correct.
lot. And so I was like, Final Fantasy movie, yeah. And like the fact that my small hometown like somehow got this movie was very shocking to me, like in retrospect.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm like, how did we get that? Like we did get a lot of movies that were like, for lack of a better word, good. Not that this one was good, but
mostly you'd probably get like the big movies.
right. Like my brother and I remember that we were in our hometown once visiting for Christmas.
Mhm.
And we wanted to go see like The Life Aquatic, and they didn't have that, so we were very upset.
Okay, here's the real question.
Okay.
How many screens did your hometown movie theater have?
Oh, that's a good question. I wonder if I can Google this. Can I do some live Googling?
Because I will tell you, the original movie theater that we had here, that I grew up with and I ended up working at, we
Mhm.
only had two,
Two. Wow.
and that was it.
Oh wow. It's not named the same thing anymore. It's not the same
They've
theater.
changed their name. I think
Yeah.
our newer theater has like 4 or 5 because they built like the old one closed down, and then like for like 5 years we didn't have a movie theater in town, and then they built a new one.
Well, it's
Still
all in the
working.
same building, so I
Mhm.
don't know that they could have gotten more. Okay, so it has 8 movies listed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's so many screens they have.
Right.
Why won't you tell me?
But that's a decent chunk though.
Yeah, I mean it's not bad, but I just remember this movie theater being very, very weird, and
Mm-hmm.
now I know that it's an AMC now instead of like whatever the heck it's called. I actually Googled like because that's what it used to be called, which I guess we should probably bleep where I'm from because that's a little weird. But apparently it's an AMC now.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's odd.
They have a stranglehold over the movie theater industry. But anyways,
Yeah, it's just odd thinking like this somehow made it to that theater.
mm-hmm.
Which how?
Because everyone really wanted to see the spirits within.
Did they?
Apparently so. This movie premiered on July 2nd, 2001, and then opened in the United States countrywide on July 11th, 2001, so 9 days later. Directed by Hironobu Sakaguchi and Motonori Sakikabara, who was the co-director. Produced by Chris Lee and Jun Aida. Screenplay by Al Reinert and Jeff Ventar, who... very American names, you would probably thinking.
Well, yeah, there's a reason for that. I can
Yes.
tell you if you don't have it on there.
Reinert was a co-writer of screenplays for Ron Howard's Apollo 13.
Wow, okay.
So he had done at least something.
Yeah.
Jeff Venter worked on I, Robot and some other stuff.
Yeah, okay.
And then music, not by who you would expect.
Nope.
Uematsu, he's out. Instead, we got Elliot Goldenthal, an Academy Award winner.
For what?
Best original score for the motion picture Frida.
Frida.
There you go.
Wow, so
In 2002. So a year later, he would win the Academy Award for Best Score.
man, that man did some generic for this movie.
Yeah, he pretty much, I think he phoned it in for this one.
Yeah.
He also did scores for Alien 3, Interview with the Vampire, Batman Forever, and Batman and Robin. Across the Universe.
Wow. Which doing those Batman movies, I guess he was the replacement for Danny Elfman after they got into a fight.
Mm-hmm. He did a weird version of The Tempest, and then basically hasn't done much since then.
Wow.
He's only done 3 movies in the 2010s.
Wow.
But yeah, you're right. This score, not great.
No, it's really bad. It's so generic.
It's very generic. It almost like, I was thinking when I was watching this, I was like, you could probably put in like a modern Marvel film score into this film and nothing would feel out of place.
Right.
Because that's what this felt like. It felt like a superhero film score instead of like a sci-fi. Quasi-horror type film.
Mm-hmm.
It's very, very bizarre. But again, it's one of those things where, you would expect, because it's Final Fantasy, that Sakaguchi would be like, well, let's get Uematsu for this. And he's like, nah, we're not going to get you. You go do those video games. We're going to get Hollywood on you. Which feels very much like a Kojima decision.
It does feel like a Kojima decision.
Which is an interesting thing to talk about. But
it should be clarified. I know I've mentioned this before. I love Sakaguchi. I love him.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's great. I think he does some really genius work. This was a series of unfortunate mistakes.
I have pulled up an article that Polygon did 2 years ago about Final Fantasy VII.
Final
There's
Fantasy
this
7?
big whole piece that they got like a bunch of people from Square to talk to them about.
Mm-hmm.
And in like the latter half of the article, they talk about the development of Spirits Within.
Oh, right. I remember that article.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull some quotes from this
Okay.
as we discuss the Spirits Within.
Mm-hmm.
This opens up with them saying basically, one of Square's initiatives following the release of Final Fantasy VII was opening up that studio in Honolulu, which they opened up in '97, and that would be where Sakaguchi would go to make Spirits Within,
Mm-hmm.
a film that took 4 years to make, and obviously, as we've talked about, did not make all its money back.
Is that the same studio where they were making 9? Because they were also in Hawaii.
Yes. This says, while Square had multiple studios around the world, the idea behind the Hawaii studio was that it wouldn't just develop games, it would also make movies. As Square had ramped up its CG resources working on cutscenes for FF7, Sakaguchi saw the potential to push that technology further.
Ah.
Aren't
Aren't we glad that we didn't get a movie that looked like Seven's CGs, though?
It's true. This quote is from Kazuyuki Hashimoto. He was the CG supervisor for Square and would become chief technical officer and senior vice president of Square USA. He mentions, toward the end of Final Fantasy VII, Sakaguchi-san came to visit my desk and said, "Oh, we have a lot of movie clips in Final Fantasy VII. We may be able to make a movie now." And I said, "Are you serious?" This from Tomoyuki Takechi, president and chief executive officer of Square. After the success of Final Fantasy VII, there were two main things that changed, two main goals that we set for ourselves. The first is we wanted to put a lot of power behind our graphics capabilities because we were thinking in 5 or 10 years, that was going to be the big thing in games. That was one of the reasons why we decided to make the Final Fantasy movie. Then the second thing was we knew that network features were going to be a big deal, so that's why we decided to take Final Fantasy online with Final Fantasy XI.
So that answers one of the questions that we had.
This from Hashimoto again. You know, when Sakaguchi-san asked me to join Square, I told him that if Square was thinking about just competing with Sega or Namco, I wouldn't be interested. If Square really wanted to compete with Disney or other global entertainment companies, then it would be very exciting. This from Jun Iwasaki, the vice president of marketing of Square US. This was Sakaguchi-san's dream. He wanted to make the first 3D graphics movie.
And then it became this.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you know the reasoning behind the whole thing with the writers, but essentially like Sakaguchi wrote the script and then those two dudes rewrote it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's usually what happens.
Yeah. So that's why they're just like really, really American dudes. Because it's weird. You have like a crew of like Japanese people, and then it's like, here's these American guys, or European sounding gentlemen.
This quote from is very interesting. This is from Shinichiro Kajitani, the vice president of Square USA. Sakaguchi-san, he left for Hawaii and built a studio in Honolulu, and from that point on, he had nothing to do with Square's games in Japan anymore. He just concentrated on making the movie. All movies for Sakaguchi are nothing.
Which isn't necessarily true, because he was involved with 8 and 9 and a little bit of 10.
But how much was he actually involved, though?
Right. I mean, he was involved, but I don't know, like, to what extent.
And also they talk about, like, the reason that they chose Hawaii was that it would basically connect them from Japan to America, because it's basically in between. And also it's because Sakaguchi liked Hawaii.
He wanted to surf.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, do you blame him if somebody's like, hey, let's figure out where we're going to put the studio? Like, I'm going to pick somewhere super pretty sweet. Like,
yeah. This quote from Hashimoto again. We need to decide how to build the movie production. Game production is like a small-scale factory, but movie production needs to be a large-scale factory. Not easy. You know Pixar. They spent about 10 years to build a movie pipeline in their studio. Square did it in just 2 years. Which probably should be a red flag when you think about it.
Yeah.
This from Junichi Yanagihara, the executive vice president of Square USA. Whenever you make a movie for the first time, there is a learning curve. And sometimes, as you can imagine, there is what we call development hell, in which many different people come in and try to give so much input that it causes delay of the process. As a result, we couldn't reach the consensus as to what to do with the story.
Also not a good sign.
This from Hiroshi Kawai, character programmer from Square Japan. The checks and balances weren't there. I think in terms of producing a game, Sakaguchi-san was probably pretty reliable in terms of his beat, in terms of what worked and what didn't work. But when it came to working in a different medium, I think the fact that there wasn't really anybody there to provide objective and constructive criticism was a detriment.
So, what? He didn't have any checks at all?
Basically, I think it's like no one was there to like no one was like experienced in the movie industry to sell it, to say like, hey, this is a good idea, this is a good idea, this is a bad idea, this is what you should do differently.
That makes sense.
Because this is, considering like this is Square doing this is probably still a bunch of people from the games industry coming over and working on this film.
Right.
This from Alexander Smith, localization specialist for Square US and Japan from 98 to 2002. The movie was an unmitigated disaster. I talked to the lawyer, and I just remember at a party, but she was the lawyer from Hawaii who had handled their applications for doing the movie there. And there were so many tax benefits on the table, and they didn't take a single one. Because they went in, and they were like, we're bringing our team. And they were like, you hire 10% Hawaiian, and you get this huge tax cut. And I don't think it was like Sakaguchi sitting there going, no, we're keeping it pure, it's our team. I don't think there was any thought at all. I think it was like that came in, and the whole organization was so dysfunctional that when that kind of news hits the grind, it never gets to the person that needs to hear it. And that's the problem. That's the problem when you've got that kind of power structure. It's like a family thing. And this is endemic in Japanese companies where it operates like a family instead of a business. And so if something isn't on the family's radar, it just doesn't happen. And there are so many missed opportunities there. So apparently they could have saved so much money, millions of dollars, if they had taken advantage of these really easy opportunities. They just had to hire janitors locally, really, and they could have done it.
Wow. But again, that might be a situation of like, they've never worked in an office overseas, so they just don't know how it like I wouldn't know if I went to Japan if I could get tax breaks right now.
Yeah, totally.
So like I could understand that, but also like Square probably could have tried to figure that out if they had wanted to.
Square is a business,
right?
A big business. They could have had people research this kind of thing.
That's true.
That is definitely a thing. This from Yoshihiro Maruyama, the executive vice president of Square US. I think Final Fantasy VII's success changed Sakaguchi's style in a slightly negative way. He thought he could do anything within the company. That's why he started investing even more money in Final Fantasy movie, which became one of the biggest flops. That made him a little out of control. The original budget of the film was like $40 million, and it ended up costing close to $150 million. So when I actually did the calculation on how much it was going to cost based on the number of people Sakaguchi wanted to assign, I quickly figured out it couldn't be finished for $40 million. But you know, they did it anyway. They kept investing more money. To follow up on that, from Hiroshi Kawai again, there's sort of this expression in Japan where you say, it's somebody else's money, and you can take it as, you need to treat it with respect because it's not yours, or you can say, well, it's not mine, so it's there to spend. And then from Yanagihara, it was all funded by Square itself, it was self-funded, and sooner or later, if you study and analyze this, you'll probably run into some articles about what happened. About the film project, Square went through a financially challenging time.
Yeah.
So again, a lot of this just feels like a mess.
Yeah.
And then eventually after the release of Spirits Within, Sakaguchi would kind of stay with the company for a little bit, but then eventually leave.
Right.
This is a quote from Sakaguchi himself about why he left. There are many, many reasons why I left, but to try and sum it up, my official title was Executive Vice President, and that meant, of course, that I had a mountain of administrative tasks to attend to. Every morning I would have a stack of papers waiting on my desk to review and approve. If there was a change to the labor laws, for instance, I had to go through training and then update our employee policies. There was a ton of work like that, but I wanted to be involved in creating things again, so all of this stress was just building up in me. I really loved Square, and I was grateful for my position, but I just didn't feel like it just didn't feel like me. That feeling was the main reason I quit. But also, we're gonna talk about some things that are in this movie that may be reasons why he decided to leave.
Yeah. There's a lot to talk about here. And I will say I looked it up, that he was either producer or executive producer for the Final Fantasies until 10.
Which that can just be a catch-all title.
But he did the scenario for 9.
Okay.
And he said that that's his favorite Final Fantasy. So, I mean, if you're writing the scenario, you're at least relatively involved.
True, but also, like, that could just be, like, a general outline scenario.
Right. But still, like, it's your story.
But again, like, that is a thing that, there's talk about how 9 was developed partially at that Hawaii studio, so
Mm-hmm.
he would have been around the same team that was probably working on that as well. So
Right.
it wouldn't have been too hard for him to do stuff with the movie and also do stuff with 9
Right.
at the same time.
So it makes sense that he was involved with 9
Mm-hmm.
more than he was with like 8. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, I just wanted to check.
Yeah, but this was his baby.
Um, that's upsetting. And like, I know that the two of us were talking about this, and as I mentioned, I really like his work. I think he's done some really great stuff, and like
Mm-hmm.
his work after this was amazing. Like Lost Odyssey was so good. It
Mm-hmm.
was so good. So like clearly he still had it. I think that this was just kind of like
It's one of those things like going from a medium to a different medium. Like,
yeah, and something that we talked about is that like when you're going from like a 30 to 40-hour game where you have a lot of room to like build up story and build up characters and all that to like an hour and a half movie, like it's a hard transition to figure out like how do I get that characterization and how do I like move the story forward. Like I imagine that that's really really difficult.
totally.
And then again, like you said, nobody really had to experience it, so they can say like, "Oh, hey, this doesn't work because like we only have 20 minutes to try and make this story make sense."
Right, exactly. Like going from, like you said, 40 hours of game or whatever, and then trying to take all of that kind of characterization, that type of writing style that you're used to by this point in time, and then just compressing that into an hour and a half. Like that's such a monumental task. And I think it's something that, like everyone kind of thinks that they can make a movie.
Yeah.
Everyone thinks that
I don't think I can make a movie.
Well, I mean, at some point in your life, you probably have an idea like I could make a movie, I could do this, but then like there is the cold hard reality sets in, and it's like, well, it's a little harder than you anticipate. And I think like this is kind of an example of that, where you might think going from games to a similar type of medium like movies or TV or whatnot would be a pretty easy kind of transition, but it turns out it's much harder than you anticipate. It's kind of like one of those things like, we mentioned him earlier, Kojima.
Yeah.
His games, they all like kind of, the trailers are all made up to be like this cinematic feel, like they look like big budget movie trailers and all that sort of stuff. But he hasn't gone off and tried to make his own movie, despite the fact that like
yet
he's like friends with all these people in Hollywood and all that sort of stuff, and like it always seems like he wants to just make movies instead of games. And maybe that's like him knowing his limitations and thinking like, this is much harder than it would probably be if I tried to go off and make my own movie instead of trying to make a game instead.
My experience with making movies is that when I was a freshman in high school, I've told you about this, we decided to do a sock puppet musical version of Romeo and Juliet. And I helped write the script, but I starred as a hamster that was like one of the like priests, I guess. I don't remember the character name, but anyway, that was my foray into filmmaking and clearly did not work out for me.
And like that's another thing too. Like script writing is a very different style of writing than like probably scenario writing is.
Yeah.
Because it's a very specific type of format. It's you have to like write in like, okay, this person is saying this, and then what are they doing in that scene, and all that sort of stuff. Like it's very very meticulous and specific to where like if you're writing a scenario, you can just be like, well, they're doing this, this, and this, and we'll flesh this out later in the game, and because the player's going to be doing all this stuff. We can kind of gloss over this sort of thing right now. But
in a movie, you can't do that.
You really can't do that. No, you have to, because a person's not interacting with a movie unless it's an interactive film. But that's a completely different thing in general. But like with a regular motion picture presentation, all that stuff, like it is a person watching it. They're not interacting with any other, and they're not interacting with it in any sort of way. There's the words I'm trying to use. So you basically have to, it's a lot of showing and telling. You can't just be like, well, assume, the person's going to do this, this, and this. No, you have to lead them along for the story, essentially.
So I have a question. Um,
Hmm.
I want to talk about his like thoughts on or his thoughts or what they did with Aki, but also like we have to talk about the story at some point. So I don't know which one you want to do first, but like I think both of those are things we have to talk about.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Well, I mean, we could get with the story and
Get with the story.
get going with the story, and because we have some stuff to talk about post story
Mm-hmm.
as well. So
Mm-hmm.
I figure we'll get into that. But also, I wanted to. I think one of the things we should mention before we start talking about the story is the theme that Sakaguchi was trying to produce with this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And this is from the Wikipedia article about Spirits Within. The director Sakaguchi named the main character after his mother, Aki, who died in an accident several years prior to the production of the film. Her death led Sakaguchi to reflect on what happened to the spirit after death, and these thoughts resurfaced while he was planning the film, eventually taking the form of the Gaia hypothesis. He later explained that the theme he wanted to convey was more of a complex idea of life and death and spirit, believing that the best way to portray this would be to set the film on Earth. By comparison, Final Fantasy video games are set in fictional worlds. Yeah, okay. There you go.
Um, which I was texting you while we were watching this horrific film. And one of the things that I was saying is like, oh, this whole like Gaia thing. For one, Gaia is the name of the world in Final Fantasy IX. But two, like this theme comes up a bit. Because we have in seven we have the live stream.
Mm-hmm.
In nine we have the mist. And then 10 we have the fireflies.
Mm-hmm. Which I guess we should mention that the Gaia hypothesis that was mentioned is a theory, principle, or hypothesis that proposes that living organisms interact with their inorganic surroundings on Earth to form a synergistic and self-regulating complex system that helps to maintain and perpetuate the conditions for life on the planet.
So again, like this theme, pretty prevalent in several big Final Fantasy games.
Mm-hmm.
Like major plot points in 7 and 9 for sure. 10 a little bit, but he wasn't as involved with 10. Um so this whole like idea of like what happens after death is clearly a theme that was thought about a lot at this point with Square, and I wonder if it was like because of him. Um but something else that we've been talking about is that like grief makes you do some weird things. It makes your brain go a little bit wonky, and
Mm-hmm.
um can confirm. Yay. Um but we'll talk about it a bit more later, but I think that that had some kind of impact on his judgment in terms of this film in
Mm-hmm.
particular. Don't let me forget to go back to that.
Yeah, this. So going into the story of this, one of the key things about this film is that it is pretty much universally panned.
Yeah.
And like we talked about earlier, like we had watched this film nearly 20 years ago,
Oh my god.
and haven't really since then.
I will say the CG still looks great.
It's surprisingly so. Like you would think that this being a film that came out in 2001, that it would probably look a little rough. And I would say some of the animation
Yeah,
of the characters look a little rough here and there, but it looks like
it's a Square Enix flex
it's some Square CG
or
that you would
Square
expect to
CG. Yeah.
see and everything. Like it's the same type of stuff you would see in the Final Fantasy games and everything. Probably a little bit more reminiscent of like the CG quality in 10
Yeah.
than the PS1 games. But yeah, it still looks pretty good, which is, like I said, very surprising that a film from 2001, a CG film specifically from 2001, would still look this good. Because like there's a lot of forms of media out there that were using CG at this time. Excuse me. And going back and looking at it, it's rough.
Yeah.
It doesn't look that good.
Nope.
But again, like this is Square basically doing what they did best when it came to cinematics. So
I mean, it generally looks pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
That's really one of the only positives I can say about it.
And then you get into the story and you're like, how is this Final Fantasy?
It's a sci-fi movie. Which I mean, I guess you could say like certain parts of Final Fantasy games are sci-fi, but not to this level of sci-fi.
Final Fantasy has never been a sci-fi shooter.
It has not been a sci-fi shooter, that is correct.
Mm-hmm.
It can
Like,
have
if you
sci-fi elements, but not sci-fi.
right, this is one of the things we talked about. Like, if you had marketed this game as Square's first movie production and not put Final Fantasy on the title,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it would be as critically panned as it was.
Right.
But again, with how much money they put into this production, they couldn't get away with doing that. They had to put Final Fantasy on the title,
Mm-hmm.
on the marquee,
Or else
because
people
if not,
wouldn't go.
yeah, they would have lost more money. They probably would have lost like twice or three times as much money.
I mean, I can confirm the only reason I went to see it is because it said Final Fantasy in the front of it.
Mm-hmm. That's the only reason like it was such a big deal in the video game culture at the time, was because it had Final Fantasy in the title.
Yeah.
This film is more akin to like, you would think it's like a spinoff of Halo or a Mass Effect, and not a Final Fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not something you would usually think when it comes to something with Final Fantasy in the title.
No. It's wild.
It's very weird.
Like when we start out, we're in like this weird, decrepit, destroyed version of New York.
Yeah, old New York City.
Old New York City. Old new.
Yeah, old new.
And you have like these gruff military dudes in this area, like fighting some weird, I don't even know how to describe them, like parasite see-through guys.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't see them, which is like the second time in a week that we've like dealt with things that have invisible critters that we have to shoot.
You just can't point at these.
Can't point at these. But then like we meet our heroine and she's like, I have to protect this plant.
Mm-hmm.
And the dudes are all like, no, this is not okay. You can't protect the plant. Come on, come on, come on. She's like fighting for this plant. And then when they get back on the ship, they're all like yelling at Aki, who is this like doctor scientist lady.
Mm-hmm.
And like the one dude pulls off his helmet. We're like, that is the most generic looking dude we've ever seen. I was like, is that Chris Redfield?
It's very much like just generic white dude who is the main protagonist of a third-person shooter from the year 2007 to 2012.
Yeah. Which also we should talk about the freaking voice cast at this point.
That is literally what I was about to say. Yeah. They went very Hollywood with this, for at least the main characters. Aki is voiced by Ming-Na, who is the voice of Mulan.
She was also Chun-Li in the Street Fighter live-action movie.
Which one?
The live-action Street Fighter movie.
The one with
Van Damme.
The one from the mid-90s. Okay. I was going to say, they made a Chun-Li's, like, specific live-action movie.
No. Like, the Street Fighter live-action. Ming-Na was her. But,
weird.
But anyway.
I did not know that.
Ming-Na went.
Dr. Sid, who is spelled S-I-D instead of C-I-D, is Donald Sutherland, who is noted father of Kiefer Sutherland. Gray Edwards, who is very generic
white man,
is voiced by Alec Baldwin,
which is hilarious.
It's very weird.
He phoned it in too.
Noted family member of some other Baldwins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a weird choice. And then your side characters, Ryan, who's voiced by Ving Rhames. Neil, who's voiced by Steve Buscemi.
Which I was like, do you know who that is? This is him. And you're like, oh God.
Steve Buscemi puts in a good performance in this film.
He does. His character is legit comic relief.
He might have the best performance in this film.
He at least,
which is saying something.
He felt like he tried.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he probably has the best performance in this film. It was hilarious, and I was like, oh my God, why is Steve Buscemi in this?
Yeah, it's the early 2000s.
Yep.
And then Jane, who's voiced by Perry Gilpin.
I don't know who that is. Also,
She was on Frasier.
you can't forget the council member number 1.
Council member number 1, Keith David, my boy.
Yep.
It's very good. I was like, oh, it's Keith David. And then the villain's voiced by James Woods, because of course you get a piece of to voice the piece of villain character. So there's your cast. It's real weird.
Yep.
Like we said. But again, like it makes sense, because of course you're gonna make this is such a big thing. You're gonna go with a Hollywood voice cast, but also like that's a really weird Hollywood voice cast for the time.
Yeah.
So there you go.
It's hilarious.
Shout out to Steve Buscemi, MVP of this production.
Seriously, MVP of the voice cast here.
Oh boy. So yeah. Old New York City. Aki goes there because she's trying to find something. The military shows up and is like, "Hey, get out of here! You're not allowed here." And she's like, "No, I am." Buzz off, and then the Phantoms show up, which is the weird parasitic, see-through aliens.
Yeah.
That you got to deal with a bunch of, and then they all leave. Aki finds a plant, and they all leave.
Yep. And then they have to get scanned.
And then Generic Man got attacked by the Phantom somehow, and they have to do emergency surgery on him.
Which, this is where we're like, oh, she's actually like a doctor, like a medical doctor.
She's a doctor of all trades.
Yep. Wow.
Square was like, doctor means this, right? And they're like, yeah, it just means whatever.
Whatever. Yeah, like I can do surgery. I have doctor in front of my name.
Go. I'm gonna break my arm, and you're gonna do surgery on my arm and fix it right up.
She like lasers the weird like space fleas out of him.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like a countdown of like, you're gonna lose him, you're gonna lose him, you're gonna lose him. Oh god! And then she like lasers the last one out. Very, very stressful.
It's very stressful. Also, they have history together.
They do have history.
She goes to see Sid, who's like, "I'm Sid. What's up? Hey, you found a plant. Good job. Don't bone that guy."
Yeah, he's like, do not bone that guy.
Don't bone that guy. They go to like a big council meeting in the barrier city of New York City, New York, basically. Aki and Sid are there, and then the evil dude, General Hine, is there. He wants to basically blow up the Earth to kill all the aliens.
Basically.
And Sid's like, what if we don't do that? And also, what if we make something that cancels out these things by using these waveforms and stuff? And everyone's like, oh, but you believe in the Gaia theory. You're a weirdo. You're off your rocker. And then Aki's like, no, he's not. Look, I got a thingy in me and I'm alive. They're like, whoa.
She like touches her chest plate and shows that she has the space fleas in her too.
They're like, oh. All right, we're not gonna blow up the planet now.
But then like the Nazi dude,
oh yeah, he's very fascist looking.
He's super fascist looking. He's like, but that means she's being controlled by them. So that's his like shadowy plan, is now she's being controlled by them. So he has to use that to leverage.
It's very generic villainy
so generic
type things. Like, he needs like just a curly mustache to twirl at all times as well, and it would have been perfect.
He's so fascist looking.
So the military group, they're called Deep Eyes, because that's sure is a name.
Yep.
They're with Aki now, and they're gonna go off to another place. And also, they have to make sure that she doesn't, like, turn on them or something. This part gets real weird and confusing.
Yep.
Because it just doesn't make sense. But basically, they're going off to find spirits, which are, like, things that have, like, the same wavelength of the aliens that they can use against them, essentially. All that sort of stuff. So they go off to, like, another place to go to find one and then get attacked by the Phantoms. They're able to get away, but then like this dude who's with them is like, you gotta go arrest her. She's bad. And they're like, no. And he's like, well, I'm gonna shoot you now. They're like, why? And then he gets his spirit sucked out by the Phantoms.
Boy.
And now the bad guys are like, they're clearly under the control of the Phantoms. They have to be arrested.
It's like phantom McCarthyism.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're not wrong. I think at that time also she goes unconscious and like nearly dies, and they have to like revive her somehow. Excuse me, somehow.
Is that when she gets shot?
Yeah.
Okay.
At one point as well, the rest of the crew puts Aki and generic white dude in like a thing together and make it so it doesn't move and so they can go to the bone zone, but then it fails.
Yep.
But yeah, they revive her and get her back, and then evil fascist dude's like, well, I'm gonna go arrest all these people. He arrests all of them and then takes over like the barrier city and is like, well, we're gonna have the Phantoms come in and be like, oh, look at us, we're gonna save the day, and then it just overwhelms the entire barrier city. Like, how did we not see this happening?
He's like, whoops.
I can't believe I didn't think this was gonna be a thing.
I'm just gonna leave now. Bye.
So like all of his compadres die, and then he takes the shuttle off to the Zeus cannon.
The Zeus cannon.
And he's gonna blow up their Earth. Then they get all the good guys get out of the prison cells.
Mm-hmm. Because
they,
like the power goes down and their lasers fall down, which it's funny because Steve Buscemi's character is like waving his hand, like trying to figure out if they.
It's not like we could just wave our hands and make the lasers disappear. Like,
and then somebody mentions like that he's not that magic or something.
So they have to escape the barrier city, which means all of them are going to die.
Yep.
So all of the side characters die one by one by one.
Well, first,
very sad.
Which, I had to mention it because one of the side characters is a black man,
mm-hmm.
and he is the first one to like go down. He doesn't die first,
but he's like trapped in the vehicle they were in because it flipped and
he gets
like
impaled by something in the gut. So
he's gonna sit there with like the turret on the back of the car and make sure nothing happens.
It happens. And then
Steve Buscemi and the girl go off to like repair something or something. I don't know. Yeah. And then a bunch of Phantoms show up, and the girl just watches Steve Buscemi's character die.
Yep.
Doesn't do anything, and then like she's like, "Well, I'm just gonna die now."
So there's this whole joke between them of like, oh man, Steve Buscemi has feelings for Jane or whatever, and his character's name is not Steve Buscemi, by the way.
It's Neil, but it's also funnier to say Steve Buscemi.
It is Steve Buscemi.
Steve Buscemi as himself.
He has the feels for Jane, and like
Jane's a tsundere.
He keeps joking about it, and she's like, "I would never be in love with you." Yeah, she's super tsundere, and then. Like after he dies while she watches and does nothing.
She's just like, oh, I'm just gonna sit here and watch this happen.
Like his soul gets ripped from his body, and she's like, and then I guess she's like, well, I guess I can't live without Steve Buscemi, so I'm just gonna let my soul. I'm gonna let my soul get taken too, and it's just.
That's a sentence you never thought you were gonna say.
It's a sentence I never thought I would say. But yeah, her soul is ripped from her and she dies next to Steve Buscemi. They are like head to head. And then like, all right, we have to go back and save the other guy. He's still trapped.
Big Phantoms are coming.
Yeah, he doesn't make it either. His soul gets taken from him.
His soul gets sucked. And then generic white guy is gonna make sure Aki and Sid are able to leave and is like gonna just stay there by himself, and Aki's like, no, I can't leave you. He's like, I got this. And then they come back and get him anyways.
Yeah, like he definitely does not got that. He would die immediately if Aki didn't come and get him, because he's
also a thing is like all of their weaponry can just work on these Phantoms.
Yeah,
and it looks just like normal military weaponry from, I guess this is 2065, but like it just looks like generic standard military weaponry.
Yeah,
but it just works fine.
But also like
never explained.
The Phantoms can be seen at this point, which is wild. I don't remember if they explained that, but at some point
they mentioned something about it, but I don't remember exactly what it was.
Who knows? So they go to space.
Also, they've revealed at this point that the Phantoms are just dead aliens. They're ghosts.
Yeah, they're ghosts.
That's it. They're just ghosts.
They're fighting the ghosties.
So yeah, they're able to get generic white guy. Neil is not back from the dead.
Sorry,
Steve did not revive.
You have to
And then they go off and they're going to go to the original like crater site because that's where the eighth and final spirit is. And then during this time, Aki and generic white guy bone.
They bone in space, zero gravity, which like
Dr. Sid told you no. Don't bone that guy.
He said don't bone that guy, but also like, correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be wrong on this. I don't actually know how things work like this. But would the equipment work in no gravity? Because I feel like that would affect like blood flow, you know?
I don't know. I don't know how blood flow works in space.
I don't either. Like there's no like artificial gravity on this thing. So like I don't know how they went to the bone zone, but apparently they went to the bone zone while floating. Mm-hmm. And then Aki just like straps herself in next to Sid's like, hey, nothing happened. Everything's fine. What's up? Like literally just doesn't address anything and leaves him back there. And like, that's gonna be awkward since he told you earlier, like, not to bone him.
Did you bone him?
Also, it's like a really tiny ship, so I'm sure Sid just sitting there, like, while like he's in the cockpit, like, I told you not to bone him, and I can hear you back there. I write better dialogue for this movie.
I mean, it's not hard. So they get to the crater, and they find the 8 spirits in there. So they have Augie and generic white man descend down there. But then the evil man shoots his laser beam down there and kills the 8th spirit, and they're now stuck down there. Like, oh no, what do we do?
Our shields are down. We're sitting ducks.
So yeah, they're sitting ducks. Bad things are happening, and then Aki just passes out.
Yep.
Because she's been having these weird dreams of the aliens and everything, and she realizes, oh, this is them before they were jettisoned and blew up their planet, and all this bad stuff happened. She gets attacked by a phantom. It like shoots its tentacles into her body, like through her body and everything, and then one of them hits her uterus, and it turns blue.
It turns blue.
And it turns the alien into a good man. And then she's like, oh, the 8th spirit, I found it. It's the birth of new life. And then they find Gaia. And then stuff happens. The cannon gets shot again. But then like he keeps shooting it too much and it blows up and kills him.
Yeah.
Gaia gets mad.
The poor dude, like one of the operational guys, just like, sir, it says that it's overheating. We should probably stop firing it. And he's like, no, we're gonna keep firing. It's like, but sir, it says that it's overheating, sir. And so he just like goes in the basement and like overrides everything, keeps shooting it, and then blows the whole spaceship up. Which, like, you know, it's fine if you want to blow yourself up with your weird space gun, but like those dudes probably made like minimum wage, and there's probably like 30 of them that you're having to shoot this gun, and you also, just killed like, all of them.
You're not even giving your villain any comeuppance.
No,
it's just he's just a dumb who blew himself up.
Yeah, like he sucks and then
part
he
of the
dies.
course for this film.
He sucks and then he dies. Literally, that's what happens.
So they have to try and figure out a way to get all the spirits to override the alien ghosts, and generic white man sacrifices himself by getting his soul sucked, and then they are fine. Which
I still don't really understand that part at all. Like I don't.
Oh, let me tell you.
Okay.
Gray sacrifices himself as a medium needed to physically transmit the completed spirit into the alien Gaia.
What?
The completed spirit of all the spirits together.
I didn't get that at all.
Well, yeah, because they didn't really explain it. They just kind of like, I'm just going to grab onto this, and then, and now everything's fine.
Yeah, okay. Wow, I apparently missed that part. I was just like, all right, I guess he decided to die.
And now everything's fine, though. No more aliens.
No more.
Earth's fine.
No more ghosties.
No more ghosts are around, but now Augie has no one to bone.
But she has a baby.
Yep. Sure does. That's Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within.
Yeah, that's that movie.
Whew.
Which Augie is an interesting character because we had talked about how they had wanted her to like be a virtual actress and like come back into other things.
Like their plan was that she's gonna show up in other movies, other games, The only thing that she shows back up in is, let's see here. In 2002, she appeared in a demonstration video that Square Pictures made to present to the Wachowskis before developing Final Flight of the Osiris for the Animatrix. Because Square worked on some stuff for the Animatrix.
Wow. They also like put her in like Maxim in a bikini, and she got voted as like one of the hottest women ever, which is wild. One of the things that I also found interesting when I was like researching a little bit about her is that at some point they're like, okay, well, she's supermodel hot. We can't have her supermodel hot. So we're going to remove her makeup and cut her hair so that people will believe that she's a scientist. And I'm like, what? What?
Yeah.
So that's some classic sexism happening, but
yeah, here. Aki's appearance was conceived by the lead animator of the project, Roy Sato, who created several conceptual designs for Sakaguchi to consider and then used the selected design as a guide for her character model. Sato perceived Aki's original look as a supermodel and subsequently removed her makeup and shortened her hair in order to give her a more intelligent look that would convince people that she is a scientist. In an interview, Sato described actively trying to make her appear as realistic as possible, making her similar to himself in as many ways as he could in the animation, including elements of his personality through facial expressions.
So she's a dude.
Yeah, I guess.
All right.
Sakaguchi commented in an interview, I think it's okay to look at Aki and be convinced that she's human.
So let's talk about Sakaguchi and Aki.
Let's talk about Sakaguchi and Aki. Do you want to talk about this, or do you want me to give my analysis of a certain scene?
Well, I'm gonna say that we're going back to the whole idea of like grief makes you do weird things, and grief makes you think in odd ways, and makes you kind of have like crises of like, you know, what is actually happening in life. And obviously Sakaguchi had the idea of like life after death in a manner like on his mind when he was making several things in the Final Fantasy series, including this. So let's talk about your theory.
Alrighty. So, like we've mentioned, this is a film that deals with Sakaguchi's grief. It is also mentioned that he basically made this character in honor of his mother. Essentially, he names it after her, which is a very strange thing to do.
Yes.
Especially with how her character kind of goes afterwards, and is placed into like the more general pop culture,
like the bikini shots.
Yeah, exactly. But let's say that Aki is Sakaguchi's mother. With that idea in mind, let's go back to the end of the movie where she is attacked by that phantom, and it hits her in the uterus and turns blue and changes. It's insinuating that her and generic white boy boned.
And that there was insemination there.
If Aki is Sakaguchi's mother, then that would make the baby Sakaguchi. And if this baby is the reason for everything turning out to become good and the change of the earth and everything, that baby is very important.
Correct.
Which means you could read into this in a few different ways. One of them is that if this baby is so important that it changes everything and is the lifeblood of the earth now, that is Sakaguchi saying, hey, Square, I'm very important to you, and you shouldn't mess with me and what I'm doing, especially because this movie is basically Sakaguchi kind of getting phased out of Square.
Right.
Over the course of the production of this film, and then, a few years after the fact, he's going to quit Square. But
quit. Quotation
marks. Considering everything that he had done, if it was not for Sakaguchi, would Square even be in the position to make films if he hadn't had, made Final Fantasy into what it is today? If it wasn't for Sakaguchi, would they be in the position to where they're a powerhouse in the video game industry and now looking to become a powerhouse in the movie industry? Without Sakaguchi, could any of this be possible? And that's the thing you could look at it with this film in particular.
You could definitely read it that way. And honestly, it makes it a little bit of a better movie than if you just read it as it is. Like if you read it as a text that is also like Sakaguchi giving his basically like "F you, I'm important" statement.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's
especially because like you look at this, the way this film has gone through 4 years of development, and from the stuff we heard from other people within Square at the time who were talking about how everything was just kind of like a dumpster fire with the way they were bleeding money. They didn't know what they were doing. And you also look at this like as this is Sakaguchi's baby.
Right.
In more ways than one, let's say. And this is his passion project. He was the one who wanted to make this. He's the one who convinced Square to make a studio in Hawaii just for him to make this. And he writes this story, and he's very happy with it. And then it's basically taken and made into something else by these American screenwriters. And then it comes out after costing them $137 million and basically does not make that up in the box office. Like, I don't know when he would have conceived this idea that's seen at the end of the film, but it definitely seems like Sakaguchi is like, hey, don't make this into being my fault.
Right.
Like, this is, if it wasn't for me, none of this would happen. But at the same time, I'm not the scapegoat here, which is basically what Square would end up doing, though.
Yeah, they scapegoated him real hard.
So it's an interesting like little way to just read that the one very specific scene in general has like so many layers to it, and like I don't know how intentional it was, or it just inadvertently kind of came into that way. I mean, I think that helps that we're looking at this, nearly 20 years after the fact, and we have the basis of history on our side now to like look at this and think like, oh, well, there's probably something more to this than meets the eye. Because like at the time, no one would basically be looking at this and thinking, oh, this is Sakaguchi thinking, or maybe potentially saying, hey, Square, this is a message to you.
Right.
And everything.
And I mean, it's been very, trying to think of the right word. It's still kind of a mystery of what went down between Square and Sakaguchi. Like they've both given their statements, but like no one really knows but them.
Yeah. And again, like just going into this reading of the scene, like I'm not saying in any sort of way that Sakaguchi is like an egotistical person.
Yeah.
Because I don't know him personally. I haven't read anything that suggests that he's just this vengeful, egotistical person who is out to get Square and all this sort of stuff. Like I don't know that. That could be the case. That could be the complete opposite of the case. But as you were saying, like, given the way that this film bombed and that a year later Square Pictures is closed down, like, and the fact that this was Sakaguchi's project, he was the reason they made this studio. It was his idea to make movies. Like, you would have to imagine that like Square would look at this and think, this dude did all of this. This is his idea. This is his project, and he's the one that f***ed up. He's the one that made us lose all this money. He's the one that made us delay our merger with Enix for a little bit because of the money we lost from this venture. Like, Square was probably immensely and it's probably the reason like they probably pushed him into like different types of jobs that stifled his creativity and basically they forced him into a position that he had to quit.
Right.
Like, I would imagine that is probably the main reasoning behind Sakaguchi leaving. But also, at the same time, he probably was like, after this film came out and it didn't do as well as he wanted it to and everything, they weren't giving him the license to work on Final Fantasy in the same way that he had previously. And, Final Fantasy is, like, his franchise in a way,
another
specifically.
Of his babies.
Yeah, and they're basically like, no, you're not going to do this. We're going to put you up in a higher position and make you do business stuff. Like, it's one of those things where like both sides are probably just at each other, and they just want it. They want to have anything to do with each other, and they're just forcing an opportunity to where, how do we split this relationship?
Yeah. And I mean, maybe that's why he was able to like go off and do something like Lost Odyssey because he's like, all right, I get to be creative again. This is
Mm-hmm.
where I really shine. Um,
And how much of Lost Odyssey do you think is like him truly coming into terms with like the grief of his mother and everything, finally getting an opportunity to write a story in that kind of nature that is more towards his wheelhouse, and also mixing that in with like the feelings he has towards Square at the time?
yeah, and I mean, honestly, something that I didn't think about until just now is that Lost Odyssey also kind of thinks about the whole idea of like grief.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the idea of immortality and like what happens when people around you die and all that. Like it,
Like Lost Odyssey feels like the true culmination of his ideas that he wanted to do with this movie.
yeah, I could see that.
And specifically because like that was like what the first real big thing he had done post his leaving Square and forming Mistwalker.
Yeah, it was like the first thing that he was like really, really heavily involved in.
So
I think
like
like
it
Blue
makes
Dragon
sense.
came before that, but not as he wasn't as involved with Blue Dragon. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think. I could be wrong. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the. Oh, he supervised development and wrote the plot of Blue Dragon. So.
But also that could have been a thing where like he could have maybe not gone as deep with that game as he maybe needed to. He needed to show that he can still make a successful game, and then with Lost Odyssey he can really kind of go into his wheelhouse and form a story that he really wants to make. I mean, I don't know. I haven't played Blue Dragon, so
I won't because of the art style.
you don't like that Toriyama art style.
Mm-mm.
Style.
I do not. I do not like it at all.
But yeah, like I think the key thing I think to take away from this is that Spirits Within, it's not a great movie.
It is not a great movie.
I won't say it's outright bad. It's not good. It's just I think the key thing we talked about after we finished watching is that like the worst thing you can say about this movie is that it's boring.
It's boring and it's generic in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
basically like that generic character Gray or whatever his name was, like literally his name's Gray. Oh my god. Like that dude is the movie. Like you can't discern him from any other thing that like you see in the time period, and like there's nothing really interesting about him. You don't really care about him. Like that's how it is with the actual movie itself too.
But the story surrounding the film,
it's fascinating.
The idea or the rise and fall of Square Pictures, the rise, or not necessarily, but I guess you could say the fall of Sakaguchi from Square's almost bankruptcy from this film. Like all of that stuff is immensely fascinating.
It's super fascinating.
And all that comes from a movie that's just
It's wild.
It's an important film in the history of like, you know, CG films and video game adaptation or video game films in general. Not a great film, but boy, does it have some good stories to come out of it.
Also, I discovered after we finished watching it that there is a on the DVD there is a Thriller parody with the characters from this movie, which had to have been so expensive.
Yeah,
because you're animating all these characters to do the Thriller dance. Like it had to have been so insanely expensive. But the fact that they even did that is just like, all right, cool.
Which apparently they basically beefed up the home video release of this because like there's a bunch of extras. There's like multiple commentary tracks, and one of the reasons they did that is because they thought, oh, if we have all these extras and everything, and then like maybe we'll recoup some of the money we lost when it came out to theaters. Which, like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
It makes sense. It's happened before with movies, but not this one.
Yeah, they didn't really, they didn't do it.
It's just a really, really fascinating movie, but not the movie itself.
It's the stories surrounding the movie, the stories surrounding the people that were involved with the movie. It's, yeah.
Also, Steve Buscemi's in it. Like, what the
Steve Buscemi, the MVP of this film.
He is the MVP of this film. He died while his not girlfriend watched.
Did nothing.
Did nothing. And probably made jokes right before it. Man, this sure is a film.
It sure is a film. So look forward in a few years when Square makes Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within 2 for the 20th anniversary.
Oh, yeah. That's not going to happen. I love your ideas, but that, yeah, no.
We talked about this after we watched it as well, but like, there is an alternate reality where this film was a success.
Yeah.
And it's weird to think of that in that way, but like, where would Square be if this film was a success? Like, Sakaguchi would probably still be there, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
He probably would have stayed longer.
Mm-hmm.
He may have still left, but he would have stayed longer than what he initially did. They may not have merged with Enix because this was a success. Like, they wouldn't have need to merge companies because they were probably still booming with money.
Right.
Who knows what the video game output is at this point? Like, obviously, you know, they talked about how they were still thinking of like, hey, we're going to make an online game. So 11 would still happen. 10 was in development at this time. So those two games would still happen. But then, like, what does 12 look like? What does 13 look like? 14, what does 14 look like? And then is 15 the unmitigated like weirdness that it was? All those sorts of things. Like, what is the stuff like Square makes this outside of Final Fantasy at that point? Do they go big into like
movies,
getting IDOS and like going into like publishing more Western games? Do they go more into movies? Like, obviously we would probably see Advent Children in some form or capacity. But like, do they start making more movies in the vein of like spin-offs of Spirits Within and where it's like more original content, or do they start making movies of the other previous Final Fantasy games?
It's an interesting idea to think about. Like, it's
like, what if 10-2 is just a movie?
I like 10-2 the way it is.
I mean, yeah, but like, if this film was a big success, like, they could have thought like, hey, we, you know, our movie production business is doing pretty good. 10 has an interesting story. What if instead of making this a game, we just make this into a film?
Yeah. And I mean, you will often hear Final Fantasy fans say like, oh, well, Final Fantasy X was the last good Final Fantasy, which that is incorrect. 10-2 was.
Yeah, it's Final Fantasy 14.
Mainline.
One of the best Final Fantasy games.
So, like, I wonder, like, if Sakaguchi had stayed on for a little bit longer and, like, kept them on track with these, like, would the disasters that were, like, 12 was okay, but, like, 13 and 15 were complete messes.
Mm-hmm. And then, like,
14 was
14 was also another mess.
Like, would that have been prevented? But
it's a great question.
There's no way to know.
But, like, would those games even have been the same as they are currently? Would they have the same ideas if Sakaguchi was still there?
Would Nomura be as big as he is?
Would Nomura have gone on to make Kingdom Hearts?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I would. What if this instead led to Disney buying Square?
Whoa.
To use as another like to bump them up with like, did Disney own Pixar by this point?
Did they? I don't know.
I don't know. But like, what if this became like Square Pictures was their a new subsidiary that they worked alongside with Pixar, and then they just made games in the same vein, but also now like Kingdom Hearts got more of a Disney push than what it originally had, which is weird to say. But what if Kingdom Hearts was like an all Disney like All-Stars type of game instead of having like Final Fantasy characters in it?
Disney purchased Pixar in 2006.
Okay, so this would have been, if we're seeing it in like Kingdom Hearts, it would have been before this. So like, what if this was like, what if Disney bought Square and Square was their Pixar instead of Pixar being Pixar?
There's so many like weird alternate universes out there.
Yep.
Man.
Like, we're going down a weird rabbit hole, but like there's some weird possibilities that could have happened if the opposite of what Spirits Within happened, and like it was even if it was like a moderate success, like so many things would be changed probably.
I wonder, like, often, it's kind of, they left around the same time. Like Uematsu was initially like tied to Square pretty hardcore. But then they both left in generally the same time period. Like, I wonder if there was some kind of thing there too. I don't know. Who knows?
All great questions.
I need like some intense biographies, my dudes. Like,
we need to tell all about Spirits Within development.
We do. Man. Because I was just looking, Uematsu started like his group Smile Please in 2004 when he left Square Enix. And Mistwalker was also founded in 2004. So it's just it's an interesting thing. Like, there's a lot of messy stuff here that we don't know about, but I would love to know about it.
And that we may never know about because of the way Japanese companies are.
Right. We may never know about it, but it's so fascinating to think about. Man.
But anyways, that's Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. A pretty bleh movie with a fascinating story surrounding it.
It's wild.
And I think that's going to wrap this episode up.
Yep.
So, you don't have to go watch Final Fantasy: Spirits Within.
No.
Let's be real.
No.
Unless you really want to see it for the historical factor of it. But yeah,
there's no reason.
Go watch a trailer and be like, oh, that CG looks good. That's all you need to know.
You basically like got the gist of it.
There you go. But yeah, if you'd like more from us, go to seasonlandcheckup.com or sac.cool, where you can find past episodes of this podcast and other podcasts like Seasonland Checkup and Jared Now Watch. You can also find columns and reviews on the site as well. If you'd like more from Anladium, go to anladium.com. She's got columns and reviews. And you can follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/animecheckup. And support us on Patreon, patreon.com/SACOVA. If you'd like unedited episodes early before they get out, and then some weird bonus episodes that we do here and there. Next week, we might talk about another movie. Or we'll do something else. Who knows? It's a true mystery.
I don't know that we can beat the game that we're currently playing before that.
Yeah, that game's long.
It's long, so
it's long.
It might be a movie.
But yeah, we'll discuss some. We may go back into the spooky dimension. Which, I mean, we kind of, this is.
It's like a weird,
vaguely horror-ish.
Yeah, it's got some ghosties in it. But also I just have like a tough weekend coming up, so. Yeah,
exactly. So we might go back to a certain series that we've discussed a lot on this podcast. So look forward to that next week, and then until then, look out for the Spirits Within.